I was staring at spreadsheets when my phone buzzed with the call that changed everything. Dad was dead. Massive heart attack at 58. At the hospital, I watched my brother Jake coldly inform our 22-year-old stepsister Madison that she gets nothing from Dad's estate. "Blood family only, sweetheart," he said as she sobbed, clutching Tyler's hand. Madison had lived with us for 7 years, called Dad. Her hero loved him, like her own father. But Jake's cruel dismissal echoed through the sterile corridor, and I realized our family was about to be torn apart forever. 2 weeks later, we gathered at the law offices of Peterson, Hartley & Associates downtown, a prestigious firm housed in a gleaming glass tower that Dad had always been proud to afford. The conference room smelled like leather and expensive cologne, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the bustling city below. Madison sat quietly in the corner, her hands folded in her lap while Jake dominated the space near the mahogany table, checking his phone and making small talk with the secretary as if this were just another business meeting. I had barely slept since the funeral, replaying Jake's harsh words to Madison over and over in my mind. Every time I looked at her red-rimmed eyes or noticed how she flinched when Jake spoke something twisted deeper in my stomach. This wasn't how Dad would have wanted things to go. I was sure of it. Mr. Peterson, a silver-haired man in his 60s wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary, cleared his throat and began reading from the official-looking document in front of him. His voice was measured and professional as he outlined the terms of Dad's last will and testament dated 3 years earlier. "To my sons, Eric and Jake Morrison, I leave my entire estate to be divided equally between them, including the family home, the auto repair business, and all financial assets. This includes the property at 15 Oak Street, the commercial building housing Morrison's auto repair, and all associated business equipment and inventory." Jake leaned back in his chair with a satisfied smile, nodding along as if he had expected exactly this outcome. But my eyes were fixed on Madison, who had gone completely pale. Her lips were pressed together so tightly they had turned white, and I could see her hands trembling in her lap. Mr. Peterson continued reading various smaller bequests to charities and family friends, but there was no mention of Madison anywhere in the document. When he finished, the silence in the room was deafening. Madison's chair scraped against the floor as she stood up abruptly. "Excuse me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I need some air." She practically ran from the room, leaving Jake and me alone with the lawyers. That's when I noticed something odd. Jake wasn't surprised by any of this. In fact, he seemed almost relieved, like he had been holding his breath and could finally exhale. For someone who had just inherited half of a substantial estate, he was remarkably calm. "Well, that's settled then," Jake said, shaking Mr. Peterson's hand. "When can we begin the transfer process?" "There are some standard procedures to follow, but we can start the paperwork immediately," Mr. Peterson replied, though something in his expression seemed uncomfortable. "I'll have my assistant prepare the necessary documents." As we walked toward the parking garage, I finally worked up the courage to confront Jake about what had just happened. The concrete structure echoed our footsteps as I grabbed his arm near his black pickup truck. "Jake, don't you think Dad would have wanted Madison to get something? I mean, she was part of our family for 7 years. Tyler calls him Grandpa, for crying out loud. Jake's face hardened instantly. "Eric, you're being emotional. This is business. Dad knew what he was doing when he wrote that will. If he wanted Madison to inherit anything, he would have included her. But something about the way he said it felt rehearsed, like he had been practicing that speech. Come on, Jake. You saw how devastated she was. Her husband left her 6 months ago. She's struggling to pay rent on her apartment, and now this. It feels cruel." That's when Jake's mask slipped completely. He grabbed my shirt and pushed me against his truck, his face inches from mine. "Listen to me carefully, little brother. I found a newer will 2 weeks ago. Dad updated it just 2 months before he died, leaving that girl a third of everything. But you know what I did with it? I burned it. Because she's not really family, Eric. She's just Dad's charity case, and I'm not about to let some outsider steal what our grandfather built with his bare hands. My blood ran cold. You destroyed Dad's real will. I protected our family's legacy, Jake hissed. And if you know what's good for you, you'll keep your mouth shut about this conversation. Madison gets nothing, and that's final. As he drove away, leaving me standing alone in that parking garage, I realized that my brother wasn't just selfish. He was a criminal. And Madison, who had no idea what Jake had done, was paying the price for his greed and cruelty. I pulled out my phone and called Madison, my hands shaking as I dialed her number. When she answered, her voice was thick with tears. "Madison, it's Eric. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," she said, though she clearly wasn't. I guess I was just hoping Dad had remembered me somehow. Silly, right? No, it's not silly at all. Madison, I want you to know that I'm going to fight for what's right here. You were Dad's daughter in every way that mattered, and he loved you. I promise you that I'm going to make this right. There was a long pause before she spoke again. Eric, you don't have to do that. Jake made it pretty clear where I stand. Jake doesn't speak for me, I said firmly. And he definitely doesn't speak for Dad. Just give me some time to figure this out, okay? But even as I made that promise, I had no idea how deep Jake's deception really went, or how much danger I was putting myself in by choosing to stand up to him. The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove straight to Peterson Hartley and Associates. Mr. Peterson seemed surprised to see me back so soon, and when I asked to speak with him privately, I noticed a nervous twitch in his left eye that hadn't been there the day before. His office was impressive with law books lining every wall and diplomas hanging in expensive frames. But as he gestured for me to sit down across from his massive desk, something about his demeanor felt off. He kept glancing toward the door as if he expected someone to interrupt us. "Mr. Peterson, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Did my father come to see you recently? I mean, within the last few months?" The older man's face went through several expressions before settling on cautious resignation. "Eric, I can't discuss client confidentiality even with family members. You understand. My father is dead," I said bluntly. "And I have reason to believe that the will you read yesterday might not have been his most recent one. If there's something you're not telling me, I need to know." Mr. Peterson was quiet for a long moment, drumming his fingers on the desk. Finally, he sighed deeply. "Your father was here every Tuesday for 6 weeks before his death. He was very troubled about something, kept asking about updating his will-making changes, but he never actually signed anything new, at least not that I witnessed." My heart started pounding. What kind of changes was he considering? I can't get into specifics, but he mentioned wanting to make provisions for Madison. He seemed to feel guilty about something said he had been unfair to her and wanted to correct that mistake. I left the law office with more questions than answers, but one thing was clear: Dad had been planning to change his will, and Jake knew it. That afternoon, I used my spare key to let myself into Dad's house on Oak Street. The two-story colonial felt eerily quiet without his presence, still smelling faintly of his aftershave, and the coffee he brewed every morning at 6 o'clock sharp. I headed straight for his home office, a small room off the kitchen where he kept all his important papers. The oak desk that had belonged to my grandfather was covered with neat stacks of bills and business documents, but I was looking for something more personal. I started with the filing cabinet, searching through folders labeled insurance, taxes, and medical. It was in a manila folder marked personal that I found something that made my blood run cold. DNA test results from Accurate Genetics Laboratory, dated 6 months earlier. The report was crystal clear. Probability of paternity between Robert Morrison and Madison Claire Bennett was 99.9%. Madison wasn't just our stepsister. She was Dad's biological daughter. My hands were shaking as I read through the accompanying documents. There were copies of old letters between Dad and a woman named Susan Bennett, Madison's mother, dating back 16 years. The letters revealed an affair that had lasted several months while Dad was separated from my mother during a rough patch in their marriage. Susan had gotten pregnant and never told Dad about Madison's true parentage. She had married another man, David Bennett, who raised Madison as his own daughter. It wasn't until David died in a car accident 2 years ago that Susan had reached out to Dad desperate for help with Madison's college expenses. That's when Dad discovered he had a biological daughter he never knew existed. The letters showed Dad's shock, his guilt, his desperate desire to make up for 16 years of missed opportunities. He had convinced Susan to let him marry her not just out of love, but because he wanted to be part of Madison's life to help support her and her young son Tyler. But there was more. I found a letter in Dad's handwriting never sent addressed to Madison. In it, he confessed the truth about her parentage and his plans to leave her a substantial portion of his estate as compensation for all the years he had missed. He wrote about his regret, his love for her, and his determination to make sure she was taken care of after he was gone. The letter was dated just 3 weeks before his death. As I sat in that quiet office surrounded by the evidence of my father's hidden guilt and love, I realized that Jake had to know the truth. He had always been involved in Dad's business affairs, had access to all his papers. There was no way he could have missed something this significant, which meant that Jake had deliberately chosen to deny Madison her birthright, knowing full well that she was his half-sister and had stronger legal rights to the inheritance than anyone realized. I took pictures of everything with my phone and carefully replaced the documents exactly where I had found them. As I locked up the house and drove home, my mind was reeling with the implications. Madison didn't just deserve a portion of Dad's estate as a loved family member. She was entitled to it as his biological child. But telling her the truth would shatter everything she thought she knew about her life and her identity. And confronting Jake with this information would be like declaring war on my own brother. Still, as I thought about Madison's tears in that hospital corridor and the way Jake had dismissed her so cruelly, I knew I didn't have a choice. Dad had died before he could make things right, but maybe I could do it for him. The question was whether I was strong enough to stand up to Jake when he inevitably tried to stop me. I spent 3 sleepless nights wrestling with what I had discovered before, finally deciding to confront Jake directly. I found him at Morrison's Auto Repair the following Thursday morning, standing in the service bay with grease-stained coveralls barking orders at 2 mechanics who had worked for Dad for over a decade. The familiar smell of motor oil and tire rubber filled the air as I approached him, my hands trembling with a mixture of anger and determination. Tony Ramirez, one of the longtime employees, nodded at me respectfully as he wheeled a hydraulic jack past us. The normalcy of the scene felt surreal considering what I was about to reveal. "Jake, we need to talk, privately." He looked up from the engine he was examining, wiping his hands on a red shop rag. "Can it wait? I'm trying to figure out why this transmission is slipping, and I've got 3 more cars to get through before noon." "No, it can't wait. And trust me, you're going to want to have this conversation away from your employees." Something in my tone must have gotten his attention because he led me to Dad's old office at the back of the shop. The small room was cramped with metal filing cabinets lining the walls and a desk covered in work orders and invoices. A calendar featuring classic muscle cars hung behind the desk, still turned to the month Dad had died. I pulled out my phone and showed him the pictures of the DNA test results. "Want to explain this to me, Jake?" His reaction told me everything I needed to know. Instead of surprise or confusion, his face immediately hardened into a mask of cold fury. He didn't even pretend to be shocked by the revelation. "Where did you find that?" "In Dad's office. You knew, didn't you?" "You've known all along that Madison is our half-sister, and you still chose to cut her out of everything." Jake's composure cracked completely. He swept his arm across the desk, sending papers and coffee mugs crashing to the floor. A framed photo of Dad standing next to his first restored Mustang shattered against the wall. "You have no idea what you're talking about, Eric. You think Dad was some kind of saint? He cheated on Mom. He lied to all of us for years, and now you want to reward that woman's kid for being the product of his betrayal." Madison didn't choose to be born Jake, and she didn't choose to be lied to about who her real father was. Dad wanted to make things right. Dad was a weak, guilty old man who was going to throw away everything our grandfather built because he couldn't live with his mistakes, Jake shouted. Well, I can live with them just fine. Madison Bennett is not getting 1 penny of Morrison money DNA test or no DNA test. That's when he told me something that made my blood turn to ice. Jake had known about Madison's parentage for over 2 years. He had intercepted the letters between Dad and Susan, had seen the DNA results long before I did. But more than that, he had been systematically manipulating Dad's guilt to control him. I made sure Dad felt terrible about what he did, Jake said with a cruel smile. Every time he started talking about being fair to Madison, I reminded him how much he had hurt Mom, how his affair had almost destroyed our family. I kept him twisted up in knots about it, and it was working perfectly until he got this stupid idea about updating his will. You're sick, I whispered. You used Dad's conscience against him. I used Dad's weakness to protect our family's interests, and it would have worked if you weren't so determined to play the hero. But Jake wasn't finished revealing the depth of his deception. He opened one of the filing cabinets and pulled out a folder thick with bank statements and financial documents. You want to know the real truth, Eric? There's barely anything left to inherit anyway. I've been transferring money out of the business accounts for months. Dad's personal savings, the business cash flow, even the equity loan on this building. It's all sitting in accounts that only I control. I stared at the papers he was showing me, trying to process what I was seeing. Account transfers, wire receipts, investment statements, all showing money being moved out of Dad's name and into various accounts controlled by Jake. You've been stealing from Dad. I've been securing our future, Jake corrected. The auto repair business is dying, Eric. People don't want to pay for quality work anymore. They want quick fixes and cheap parts. I saw the writing on the wall and started moving assets before everything went under. This is embezzlement, Jake. This is fraud. This is survival. And if you're smart, you'll keep your mouth shut and take your cut. But if you try to cause trouble, if you try to give Madison one single thing that belongs to this family, I will make sure you go down with me. I've got documentation showing that you knew about the financial transfers. I've got your signature on some very interesting paperwork that could be interpreted as conspiracy to commit fraud. My mind reeled as I realized the full scope of Jake's manipulation. He hadn't just stolen Dad's money. He had been planning this for months, maybe years. The destroyed will, the hidden DNA results, the financial theft, it was all part of a calculated plan to steal everything and leave Madison with nothing. You killed Dad's spirit, I said quietly. All those months of guilt and manipulation, the stress of knowing he had a daughter he couldn't acknowledge, the worry about the business failing. You put him through psychological torture. I did what was necessary, Jake replied coldly. And now I'm giving you a choice. Stay quiet. Take your share of what's left and live comfortably. Or try to play hero for Madison and watch your whole world come crashing down. As I left the shop that day, I knew that my brother wasn't just greedy or selfish. He was dangerous. And Madison had no idea what she was up against. But I also knew that I couldn't let him win. Dad had died carrying the weight of guilt that Jake had deliberately made worse, and Madison was about to lose everything that was rightfully hers. If I was going to fight for what was right, I needed allies. It was time to tell Madison the truth about who she really was. I met Madison at a small coffee shop called Brood Awakening on the other side of town, far from anywhere Jake might think to look for us. She arrived 15 minutes late, apologizing profusely while juggling her purse, a law textbook, and her 4-year-old son Tyler's backpack. I had forgotten that she was in her final year of criminal justice studies at the local community college. Tyler was a beautiful little boy with sandy hair and bright green eyes that reminded me painfully of Dad. He clutched a small toy truck as Madison settled him at the table with a coloring book and crayons, her movements efficient, despite the exhaustion I could see in her face. "I'm sorry for dragging you out here," I said, watching as she ordered Tyler a chocolate milk and herself a coffee that she probably couldn't afford. "But I need to tell you something important, and I need you to hear me out completely before you react." Madison's expression grew cautious. "Eric, If this is about the inheritance, you don't need to feel guilty. Jake made his position clear, and honestly, I can't fight someone who has lawyers and money when I'm barely keeping my head above water. I took a deep breath and pulled out printed copies of the DNA test results and Dad's unsent letter. Madison, you're not just Dad's stepdaughter. You're his biological daughter. Dad is Tyler's grandfather by blood. The color drained from her face as she stared at the documents. Her hands shook as she read through the letter, her eyes filling with tears. Tyler looked up from his coloring book, sensing his mother's distress. "Mommy, are you sad?" "Mommy's okay, sweetheart. Keep coloring that fire truck." We sat in silence for several minutes while Madison processed what I had told her. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "My whole life has been a lie." "Not your whole life," I said gently. "Dad loved you. That was real. He wanted to make things right and Jake stopped him." Madison's expression shifted from shock to something harder, more determined. "Jake knew about this." I told her everything. The destroyed will, the financial theft, Jake's manipulation of Dad's guilt. With each revelation, Madison's posture straightened and her jaw set with resolve. By the time I finished, she looked like a completely different person. "I've been studying criminal law for 3 years," she said quietly. "What Jake did isn't just morally wrong. It's felony theft, destruction of evidence, and conspiracy to commit fraud. He could go to prison for decades." That's when she told me something that made my heart race with hope. For the past month, ever since the funeral, Madison had been documenting every interaction with Jake, every cruel comment, every dismissive gesture. Her criminal justice professors had taught her to always gather evidence, and her instincts had told her something was wrong about the way Jake was handling Dad's estate. She pulled a small digital recorder from her purse. "I've been recording every conversation I've had with family members since Dad died. I have Jake on tape admitting that he thinks I don't deserve anything because I'm not real family. I have him laughing about my financial struggles and saying that Dad only married my mother out of pity." "Madison, that's incredible. With the DNA evidence and the recordings, we might actually have a case." But our moment of hope was shattered when Madison's phone rang. The caller ID showed Tyler's daycare center, and when she answered, her face went white with terror. "What do you mean he's gone?" she said into the phone, her voice rising with panic. "Who picked him up? I didn't authorize anyone to pick him up." I watched as Madison's world collapsed for the second time in a month. Tyler had been removed from daycare by Child Protective Services following an anonymous report of neglect and unsafe living conditions. The caseworker had mentioned that a concerned family member had provided evidence that Madison was mentally unstable and unable to properly care for her child. "Jake," Madison whispered, staring at her phone in disbelief. "He took Tyler." We rushed to the CPS office where a stern-faced caseworker named Mrs. Patricia Hughes explained that Tyler had been placed in emergency foster care pending an investigation. The anonymous report included photographs of Madison's apartment that showed dishes in the sink, unpaid bills on the counter, and Tyler's toys scattered around the living room, all presented as evidence of neglect. "But those are just normal signs of a working single mother," Madison protested. "I work part-time and go to school full-time. Of course, my apartment isn't perfect, but Tyler is loved and cared for." Mrs. Hughes was sympathetic, but firm. "I understand this is difficult, Ms. Bennett, but we have to take these reports seriously. The temporary custody hearing is scheduled for next week. Until then, Tyler will remain in protective custody." As we left the CPS office, Madison broke down completely. "He's using my baby against me. Tyler doesn't understand what's happening. He's going to think I abandoned him." I put my arm around her shoulders, feeling a protective rage build in my chest, unlike anything I had ever experienced. Jake had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Using an innocent child as a weapon in his war against Madison was beyond cruel. It was evil. "We're going to get Tyler back," I promised her. "And we're going to make Jake pay for everything he's done." But even as I said those words, I knew that Jake held all the cards. He had money connections and years of careful planning on his side. Madison and I had truth and evidence, but in a system where influence often mattered more than justice, I wasn't sure it would be enough. That night, as Madison sobbed herself to sleep on my couch, I realized that this wasn't just about inheritance anymore. This was about family, about protecting the people you love, and about standing up to bullies who think their power makes them untouchable. Jake wanted a war. He was about to get one. The next morning, Madison and I met with Sarah Chen, a family law attorney who had been recommended by Madison's criminal justice professor. Sarah's office was modest but professional, with diplomas from state universities rather than Ivy League schools, and her rates were actually within reach for people like us. After reviewing our evidence and listening to Madison's recordings, Sarah confirmed what we had hoped. We had a strong case for challenging the will and exposing Jake's criminal activity. But she also warned us that Jake would fight back hard, and we needed to be prepared for escalation. "Your brother sounds like a narcissist with sociopathic tendencies," Sarah told me bluntly. "People like that don't accept defeat gracefully. If we're going to take him down, we need to be thorough, and we need to be careful." That's when Madison revealed another crucial piece of information. During her criminal justice studies, she had learned about financial forensics, and she had been quietly investigating the family business accounts for weeks. What she had discovered made my head spin. Jake hadn't just been stealing from Dad's personal accounts. He had been systematically draining money from Morrison's auto repair for over 2 years. Customer payments, insurance settlements, even the employee's pension fund had been diverted into accounts that Jake controlled. The business was essentially bankrupt, kept afloat only by Jake's manipulation of the books. "I've got bank statements, canceled checks, even email communications between Jake and offshore banking institutions," Madison said, spreading documents across Sarah's desk. "He's been hiding money in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. This isn't just theft, it's money laundering on an international scale." Sarah whistled low under her breath as she reviewed the evidence. "Madison, this is federal crime territory. We're not just talking about inheritance disputes anymore. We're talking about charges that could put your brother away for 20 years. But our investigation took a dangerous turn when I decided to break into Jake's office at the auto shop to look for additional evidence. Madison insisted on coming with me, despite my protest that it was too risky. We waited until midnight on a Tuesday when we knew the shop would be empty. I used the key I had copied years earlier when I worked summers for Dad, and we slipped inside through the back entrance. The familiar smell of motor oil and metal took on a sinister quality in the darkness. Jake's office was locked, but Madison surprised me by pulling a set of lockpicks from her purse. "Criminal justice class," she explained with a weak smile. "They taught us how to think like criminals to better understand crime scenes." What we found in Jake's filing cabinets was even worse than we had imagined. Not only did we find detailed records of his financial crimes, but we also discovered evidence that he had been monitoring both Madison and me for weeks. Hidden in a folder marked "Security" were photographs of Madison's apartment, her work schedule, Tyler's daycare routine, and even transcripts of phone conversations. "He's been watching us," Madison whispered, her face pale as she looked through the surveillance materials. "He knows everywhere I go, everyone I talk to." That's when I found something that made my blood run cold. A small electronic device hidden behind Dad's old desk that I recognized as a listening device. Jake had been eavesdropping on conversations in the shop office probably for months or even years before Dad died. But the most shocking discovery was a manila envelope labeled "Insurance" that contained something I never could have imagined. Inside were medical records showing that Dad had been prescribed heart medication that he had never mentioned to anyone. The prescriptions were filled at a pharmacy across town far from where Dad normally went, and they were for drugs that could be dangerous if mixed with other medications. Madison grabbed my arm as she read through the medical documents. "Eric, look at the dates. These prescriptions were filled every month for the last 6 months of your dad's life. But look at the prescribing doctor. It's not your dad's regular physician." The doctor's name on the prescriptions was Thomas Kellerman, someone I had never heard of. A quick internet search on Madison's phone revealed that Dr. Kellerman had lost his medical license 3 years earlier for prescribing unnecessary medications to elderly patients. Jake was drugging Dad. I said the terrible truth finally becoming clear. He was slowly poisoning him with heart medication, making his condition worse. Madison's face was grim as she photographed every document. Your father didn't die of natural causes, Eric. This was murder. Slow, calculated murder designed to look like natural heart failure. We were so focused on the evidence we were gathering that we almost missed the sound of a car pulling into the parking lot outside. Through the small window in Jake's office, I could see headlights approaching the building. We need to get out of here, now. We quickly gathered the most important documents and evidence, but as we tried to leave through the back entrance, we heard the front door opening. Jake's voice echoed through the shop, along with another voice I didn't recognize. The little brother thinks he's clever, Jake was saying. But I've been 3 steps ahead of him this whole time. Tomorrow I transfer the last of the accounts and disappear. Let Eric and his precious Madison try to prove anything when I'm sitting on a beach in Costa Rica. Madison and I hid behind a stack of tires in the storage room, barely breathing, as Jake and his companion walked through the shop. Through a crack in the door, I could see that the other man was someone I recognized from around town. Marcus Webb, a local private investigator with a reputation for working cases that legitimate PIs wouldn't touch. What about the kid? Marcus asked. The foster care placement won't last forever. The kid was just leverage, Jake replied coldly. Once I'm gone, Madison can have her precious little boy back. She'll be too busy trying to survive to cause me any more trouble. As they moved toward the front of the shop, Madison and I slipped out the back entrance and ran to my car. But as we drove away, I realized that we had learned something crucial. Jake was planning to disappear, and we were running out of time to stop him. We need to move fast, Madison said, her voice tight with determination. If Jake gets away with that money, Tyler and I will never be safe. He'll always be out there with the resources to hurt us whenever he wants. I looked at this remarkable woman who had gone from grief-stricken stepdaughter to determined crime fighter in just a few weeks, and I felt something I had never experienced before. The fierce desire to protect someone I loved at any cost. He's not getting away, I promised her. Whatever it takes, we're going to stop him and get Tyler back. But deep down, I knew that our next confrontation with Jake would be our last. One way or another, this war between us was about to end. The next day, armed with our evidence and Sarah Chen's legal advice, Madison and I went straight to the FBI field office downtown. Agent Patricia Rodriguez, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who specialized in financial crimes, reviewed our documentation with growing interest and alarm. This is a complex case involving multiple federal crimes, she told us after spending 2 hours going through our evidence. Wire fraud, money laundering, murder, we're talking about charges that could put your brother away for life. But we need to move quickly if he's planning to flee the country. Within hours, federal agents had obtained warrants to freeze Jake's accounts and search his properties. But when they arrived at the auto shop that evening, they found it empty, except for a note taped to the cash register. Gone fishing at the cabin. See you when I see you. Jake. I knew exactly where he had gone. Dad owned a remote fishing cabin about 2 hours north of town, nestled in dense woods near a lake that was barely accessible by car. It was the perfect place for someone to lay low while making final preparations to disappear forever. But there was something else. Madison had remembered that Tyler loved the cabin. Dad had taken him fishing there several times, and Tyler always talked about the rope swing that hung over the water and the family of deer that came to drink at the dock every evening. If Jake was planning to disappear permanently, he might have taken Tyler there as a final bargaining chip. We have to call the FBI, Madison said as we sat in my apartment looking at maps of the area around the cabin. They have trained negotiators, SWAT teams, people who know how to handle situations like this. The cabin is completely isolated, I replied. No cell service, one narrow dirt road in and out. If Jake sees law enforcement coming, he could hurt Tyler or disappear deeper into the woods. We might never find them. Madison was quiet for a long moment, staring at a photo of Tyler that she kept in her wallet. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that we go up there ourselves tonight. Just the two of us. Jake won't expect it, and we might be able to get Tyler out safely before anyone gets hurt. It was a risky plan, probably a stupid plan, but it was the only option that gave us any chance of rescuing Tyler without putting him in greater danger. Madison agreed, despite my attempts to convince her to stay behind where it was safe. Tyler is my son, she said firmly. I'm not hiding while someone else fights for him. We left at dusk, taking my Honda Civic because it would be less conspicuous than Madison's bright red sedan. The drive to the cabin felt endless, winding through increasingly remote back roads until we were surrounded by nothing but tall pine trees and darkness. The cabin sat on a small bluff overlooking the lake, accessible only by a narrow dirt driveway that wound through thick forest. As we approached on foot, having parked my car a quarter-mile away, I could see light coming from the windows and smoke rising from the chimney. Jake's pickup truck was parked beside the cabin, but there was no sign of Tyler or anyone else. Madison gripped my hand tightly as we crept closer, staying low and moving carefully through the underbrush. That's when we heard it, Tyler's voice high and scared, calling for his mommy. The sound cut through me like a knife, and I felt Madison's entire body tense with maternal fury. We circled around to the back of the cabin where a set of French doors opened onto a small deck overlooking the lake. Through the glass, we could see Jake sitting at the kitchen table with a laptop computer and several cell phones spread out in front of him. Tyler was in the corner playing quietly with some toys but looking confused and frightened. Jake was talking on one of the phones, his voice carrying through the thin walls. The money transfer will be complete by midnight. Have the boat ready at the marina. We'll need to move fast once I get there. Madison started toward the door, but I grabbed her arm. Wait, we need a plan. If we just rush in there, Tyler could get hurt. That's when Jake's voice changed, becoming louder and more agitated. What do you mean there's a problem with the account I specifically arranged for those funds to be available tonight? I could see his face through the window, and the expression of panic and rage told me that something had gone seriously wrong with his escape plan. A few minutes later, he slammed the phone down and swept his arm across the table, sending the laptop and phones clattering to the floor. Damn it, he shouted, causing Tyler to whimper with fear. Those FBI idiots froze everything. How did they find out so fast? Jake began pacing back and forth across the small room, running his hands through his hair and muttering to himself. He looked like a man who was coming unhinged, and I realized that our situation had just become much more dangerous. Madison must have seen the same thing because she whispered urgently in my ear, Eric, we have to get Tyler out of there right now. Jake's losing it. I nodded and pointed toward the French doors. You go around to the front and create a distraction. When Jake comes to investigate, I'll grab Tyler and get him out the back. What kind of distraction? Throw rocks at the front windows, make noise, anything to draw him away from Tyler. Just be ready to run when I give you the signal. Madison disappeared into the darkness, and I positioned myself beside the French doors, my heart pounding so hard I was sure Jake would be able to hear it. A few minutes later, the sound of breaking glass came from the front of the cabin, followed by Madison's voice shouting Jake's name. Jake Morrison, I know you're in there. The FBI is on their way and you're surrounded. Let Tyler go, and maybe they'll go easy on you. I heard Jake curse and storm toward the front of the cabin. The moment he was out of sight, I slipped through the French doors and scooped Tyler up in my arms. The little boy looked up at me with confused relief. Uncle Eric, where's Mommy? I want to go home. Mommy's here, buddy. We're going to take you home right now. But as I carried Tyler toward the back door, Jake appeared in the doorway, blocking our escape. His face was twisted with rage, and he was holding something in his right hand that made my blood freeze. A hunting knife with a 6-inch blade. You just couldn't leave it alone, could you? Eric, you had to play the hero, had to ruin everything I worked for. I set Tyler down gently behind me, keeping myself between him and Jake. This doesn't have to get worse, Jake. The money's gone. Your escape plan is blown, but Tyler is innocent. Let him go. Jake's laugh was harsh and bitter. Tyler was never supposed to be part of this. But you and Madison just couldn't accept that some people aren't meant to be part of our family. Now look what you forced me to do. I didn't force you to do anything. You chose this path when you decided that greed was more important than family. Family, Jake snarled. You think that woman and her bastard child are family? Dad made one mistake 16 years ago, and you want to throw away everything our grandfather built because of it? Madison is our sister, Jake. Tyler is our nephew. That makes them family whether you like it or not. Jake raised the knife, his eyes wild with desperation and rage. Then I guess I'll just have to make sure none of you are around to cause me any more problems. That's when Madison appeared behind Jake, having circled back around the cabin. She was holding a heavy piece of firewood, and before Jake could react, she brought it down hard on his wrist. The knife went flying across the room as Jake howled in pain and fury. "Run, Tyler," Madison shouted, and Tyler immediately sprinted toward me. What followed was a brutal struggle as Jake, despite his injured wrist, fought with the desperate strength of a cornered animal. He tackled Madison to the ground, and they rolled across the cabin floor, knocking over furniture and smashing dishes. I wanted to help, but Tyler was clinging to my legs in terror, and I couldn't risk him getting hurt in the fight. Finally, Madison managed to break free and grab the hunting knife from where it had fallen. She held it pointed at Jake, her hands shaking, but her voice steady. "It's over, Jake. The police are coming. The FBI has all the evidence they need, and your money is gone. Surrender now, and maybe you can avoid the death penalty for murdering Robert Morrison." Jake's face went white. "You can't prove I killed Dad." Madison pulled out her phone and played a recording of Jake's conversation from earlier that evening, the one where he had unknowingly confessed to slowly poisoning Dad with the wrong heart medication. "I've been recording everything since we got here," she said calmly. "Every threat, every confession, everything. It's already been uploaded to the cloud, so destroying my phone won't help you." As the sound of sirens finally reached us through the woods, Jake collapsed into a chair and put his head in his hands. The fight had gone out of him completely, and he suddenly looked like a broken, pathetic man, rather than the monster who had terrorized us for weeks. "I never meant for it to go this far," he whispered. "I just wanted what was mine. What our grandfather left for us." "You wanted everything," I said quietly. "And you were willing to destroy everyone who got in your way to get it." As federal agents and local police officers filled the cabin, Madison scooped Tyler into her arms and held him tight, tears streaming down her face. Tyler was safe. Jake was in custody, and the nightmare was finally over. But as I watched my brother being led away in handcuffs, I felt no satisfaction, only a deep sadness for what our family had become, and what it might have been if greed and jealousy hadn't poisoned everything Dad had tried to build. 6 months later, I stood outside the federal courthouse in downtown Seattle watching as the last of the news vans pulled away from the curb. Jake had just been sentenced to 25 years in federal prison for murder, fraud, money laundering, and a dozen other charges. The judge had been particularly harsh in her sentencing remarks, noting that Jake had shown no remorse for his crimes and had used an innocent child as a weapon in his scheme. Madison emerged from the courthouse holding Tyler's hand, both of them looking tired but relieved. Tyler had grown 2 inches since the night at the cabin, and his nightmares had finally stopped, thanks to the patient work of a child psychologist who specialized in trauma recovery. "How do you feel?" I asked Madison as we walked toward the parking garage. "Empty," she said honestly. "I thought I would feel more satisfied when this was all over, but mostly I just feel sad. Sad for your dad. Sad for what Jake could have been sad for all the time we lost fighting instead of being a family." The legal aftermath had been complex, but ultimately successful. A federal judge had ruled that Jake's destruction of Dad's legitimate will constituted fraud, and Madison's biological relationship to Dad had been legally established through DNA testing. The estate had been redistributed according to what Dad's intentions clearly were, with Madison receiving her rightful share as his biological daughter. More importantly, the international task force that investigated Jake's money laundering operation had managed to recover most of the stolen funds from offshore accounts. Morrison's auto repair was back in business under Madison's management, with me handling the financial side, while she completed her criminal justice degree. The business was thriving in ways it never had under Jake's corrupt leadership. We had hired back all the employees that Jake had laid off, restored the pension fund that he had looted, and even expanded into hybrid and electric vehicle repair. Dad would have been proud of what we were building together. Tyler ran ahead of us toward the car, his energy and resilience a constant reminder that children can heal from even the most traumatic experiences when they're surrounded by love and stability. He called me Uncle Eric now, and Madison had legally changed her last name to Morrison, finally claiming her true identity as Dad's daughter. I got accepted to law school, Madison told me as we drove home. Seattle University offered me a full scholarship based on my criminal justice grades and my work on this case. I want to specialize in family law, help other people who are dealing with inheritance disputes and fraud. That's incredible, Madison. Dad would be so proud of you. I hope so. I still think about him every day, wonder what our relationship might have been like if he had lived long enough to tell me the truth himself. He loved you, I said simply. Everything he did in those last months, all the guilt and worry he carried it, was because he loved you and wanted to make up for lost time. That love was real, even if he never got the chance to express it the way he wanted to. We had started a tradition of visiting Dad's grave every Sunday after church, bringing Tyler to leave flowers and tell his grandfather about his week at school. The headstone read, Robert James Morrison, beloved father and grandfather, with space left for the rest of us when our time comes. Madison had also tracked down her biological mother, Susan, and they were slowly rebuilding their relationship. Susan had carried guilt for 16 years about keeping Madison's parentage a secret, and learning about Jake's crimes had helped her understand why Robert had seemed so distant and troubled in his final months. As for me, the experience had changed everything about how I saw myself and my place in the world. I had always been the quiet younger brother, the one who avoided conflict and let others make the hard decisions. But standing up to Jake fighting for Madison and Tyler had shown me that I was stronger than I had ever imagined. I had also discovered something unexpected in the process. I was in love with Madison. Not the inappropriate love of a stepbrother for a stepsister, but the deep, genuine love of a man for a remarkable woman who had shown incredible courage in the face of overwhelming adversity. It had taken me months to work up the courage to tell her how I felt, and her response had been worth the wait. "I've been hoping you would say that," she had whispered the night I finally confessed my feelings. But I wanted to make sure we were both ready for something real, not just trauma bonding from everything we went through together. Our relationship was still new, still growing, but it was built on a foundation of mutual respect, shared values, and genuine affection that felt unshakable. Tyler adored the idea of us becoming a real family, and Madison's mother had given us her blessing when we told her about our feelings for each other. The house on Oak Street where Dad had lived and died was being renovated to accommodate all of us. Madison and Tyler had moved in 3 months earlier, and we were slowly erasing the painful memories and replacing them with new traditions and happy moments. Tyler's room was painted bright blue with glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling, and Madison had converted Dad's old office into a study where she could prepare for law school. We had also established a scholarship fund in Dad's memory, specifically for young people who were pursuing education, despite financial hardships or family complications. The first recipient was a teenage girl whose stepfather was trying to prevent her from going to college, and Madison had personally helped her navigate the legal system to establish her independence. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Jake had just been willing to share," Madison said as we pulled into our driveway. "If he had accepted me as family instead of seeing me as a threat, We all could have been happy together. Jake made his choices, I replied. He chose greed over family control, over love and revenge, over forgiveness. Those choices led him exactly where he ended up. And we made different choices. We chose each other. We chose to fight for what was right instead of what was easy. We chose love. As we walked toward the house, Tyler running ahead to play with the golden retriever puppy we had adopted from the local shelter, I felt a deep sense of peace and purpose that I had never experienced before. The inheritance dispute that had nearly destroyed our family had ultimately brought us closer together and shown us what really mattered. Money, property, and material possessions were important, but they were nothing compared to the bonds of love, trust, and mutual support that made a real family. Dad's legacy wasn't the auto repair shop or the house on Oak Street. It was the love he had tried to show us all, even when guilt and manipulation made it difficult for him to express it clearly. That evening, as Madison and I tucked Tyler into bed and listened to him say his prayers, I realized that we had created something beautiful out of something terrible. We had taken Jake's legacy of greed and betrayal and transformed it into a story of justice, forgiveness, and hope. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what you know is right? Sometimes the hardest decisions we face aren't about choosing between good and evil, but about choosing between different people. We love. I learned that real family isn't defined by blood or legal documents. It's defined by who stands with you when everything falls apart, who fights for you when you can't fight for yourself, and who loves you enough to tell you the truth even when it hurts. If this story touched your heart or reminded you of your own family struggles, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Your support helps me continue telling stories about real people facing real challenges with courage and grace. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about family justice and the power of doing the right thing even when it's difficult. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it inspires you to stand up for the people you love no matter what obstacles you might face. Sometimes being a hero doesn't require superpowers. It just requires the courage to choose love over fear and justice over convenience.